So, when we think about the life of the Buddha, we're usually presented with this incredible, almost mythic story. But what if there's another way to look at it? Today, we're going to explore the life of the Buddha through two very different lenses. One is that familiar miraculous tale, and the other, well, it's a much more rational, historical interpretation that might just challenge everything you thought you knew.
All right, let's just jump right into the heart of it with this question. It's a really sharp one, and it was famously posed by the great social reformer, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Think about it for a second. Does that story really make sense? This single question kind of pokes a hole in the traditional narrative and forces us to look a little deeper. So this is basically our roadmap for today. On the one hand, you have the beautiful, almost poetic story from texts like the Buddhacarita, which is filled with gods and miracles and destiny. But on the other hand, you've got Dr. Ambedkar's work, which tries to strip away all the supernatural stuff to find the man, a man responding to the very real problems of his time.
Now, to understand either version of the Buddha, you can't just look at him in isolation. We have to understand the world he was born into. And let me tell you, it was not a quiet time. It was an age of massive, society-shaking upheaval.
Yeah, forget any idea of some static, ancient world. The 6th century BCE in India was an era of incredible turbulence. New technology and new money were completely rewriting the rules of society, from the bottom all the way to the top.
And here's how it happened. It was like a chain reaction. It all kicks off with the widespread use of iron tools. Suddenly, farming is way more efficient. That leads to a massive food surplus, which means not everyone has to be a farmer anymore. And what happens then? Boom, the rapid growth of cities. And inside these new cities, you get new kinds of people with new kinds of power.
And all this change created a lot of tension. You had the warrior class, the Kshatriyas, who had all the political muscle but were still considered second to the Brahmin priests. You had merchants getting incredibly rich, but their social status just wasn't keeping up. On top of that, the old Vedic rituals, especially animal sacrifices, were starting to seem wasteful for a society that depended on agriculture. The result? You get this widespread feeling that the old system just isn't working anymore. People were hungry for something new.
So, the stage was set perfectly. You see, Buddhism didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It emerged into this buzzing, competitive marketplace of ideas, with all these radical new philosophies fighting for attention.
This whole intellectual explosion is known as the Shramana Movement. These were thinkers who basically said, we're done with the old rules. They rejected the authority of the priests and the ancient texts. Their big idea was that spiritual truth wasn't something handed down to you. It was something you had to find for yourself, through your own hard work and discipline. And what a marketplace it was. I mean, look at this. You had Mahavira and Jainism pushing for extreme nonviolence. Then you had thinkers like Macaulay Gosala, who believed everything was predetermined. Total fatalism. You had materialists saying there's no soul, no afterlife, this is all there is. And even agnostics who said, you know what, it's impossible to know any of this for sure. The Buddha was walking into a world just crackling with debate. Okay, so it's into this world, this pressure cooker of social change and philosophical revolution, that our central figure, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, is finally born. And the traditional story of his birth is just epic. His mother, Queen Mahamaya, has this mystical dream of a white elephant, a sign of a pure divine conception. Wise men predict he'll either be a king who conquers the world or a spiritual leader who saves it. He's born. And then, just 7 days later, his mother tragically passes away. It's a story fit for a legend.
But this brings us right back to that critical voice. Dr. Ambedkar hears the famous story of the sheltered prince finally seeing old age, sickness, and death for the first time, and his reaction is just, I can't believe it. It just doesn't sound plausible for a 29-year-old man, prince or not.
Ambedkar's argument was that this whole foresight story was probably added later as a kind of powerful metaphor. For him, Siddhartha's real reason for leaving the palace wasn't some naive shock. No, it was a deeply considered response to the very real-world problems we've been talking about, the social injustices, the political strife, and all those competing philosophies.
And this way of seeing the Buddha as a social reformer, well, it leads us straight to what might be his most revolutionary act, the creation of the Sangha, the community of monks, and especially its radical inclusion of women. Once again, Ambedkar asks a very practical, almost economic question. He asks, okay, in a society where labor and production are everything, what's the point? What is the social utility of having this huge group of men who don't farm, don't build, don't run businesses? What do they do for society?
And that question about social purpose gets even sharper, and honestly, even more interesting when we think about what happened next. The creation of the Bhikuni Sangha, an order of nuns. This was unheard of.
And this is where we see true Nari Shakti, women's power in action. The very first nun was Mahapajapati Gautami, who was actually the Buddha's foster mother. This wasn't just a small step, it was a revolution. For the first time, women had a path outside of marriage and family. They could get an education, they could lead, they could be independent. And we know this because their words survive in the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns. It's one of the oldest collections of literature written by women anywhere in the world. Just incredible.
In the end, the Buddha's final message wasn't follow me or worship me. It was this deeply personal, empowering instruction, Appa Dipo Bhava. Be your own light, be your own lamp. Trust your own experience and reason to find the way.
So that's what I want to leave you with. When we set aside the miracles for a moment, do we find a figure who is in some ways even more revolutionary? Not just a spiritual guide, but a radical social reformer who looked at the world around him, saw its deep injustices, and dared to build something entirely new.